Hi, welcome to Strategy Blitz Power Grid. Alright, let's talk about a couple of tips now that you know how to play. First, one of the things that people have a difficult time deciding whether to or not to do is, since you can on each of your power plants hold twice as many resources as it needs to generate, do you or do you not overbuy resources? Well, a couple things to consider. So let's just use this one simple one as an example. So your standard 4 plant, 2 coal to power 1. Well, if you are going to change turn order, so if you are buying early in the turn, this turn, and you anticipate that you're going to build a lot of buildings so that the following turn you're now going to move up in the turn order and therefore buy later, that is a good time to buy up more resources. If you are not going to do that, if you are early in the turn order and you anticipate that you're still going to be early in the turn order next turn, then usually it is not a good idea to buy more resources. A little bit of an exception at the beginning of the game when a resource is worth 1, because it cannot be cheaper. You might as well buy every resource as 1 just because. Now, why? Let's kind of pretend it's more towards the middle of the game and prices look something like this. Now, if you are not going to change turn order, then the problem is if you overbuy resources, so let's say you need your 2 coal and then you pick up 2 more, all right? And then you end up making an opponent pay more. Well, that's fine, but consider a scenario where, let's say you and player 2 are both using a coal plant, and players 3 and 4 are using an oil plant each. Well, if you and the other player using coal engage in a little bit of financial warfare, if you each overbuy, then what you end up doing is you're going to sort of increase the cost for each other every time you're going to engage with coal. Whereas if your opponents, your opponent 3 and 4, if they sort of made peace and bought fewer and didn't overstock, then they can do a little bit to keep their prices lower. So that's something to keep in mind. It is usually only a good idea to overbuy if you are anticipating that you're going to move in turn order dramatically, or near the very end of the game when coal refill gets very scarce. Coal can often run out. In that scenario, if you anticipate that you're going to need the coal for the end game and that you are legitimately fearful that it's going to completely sell out, then you might want to pick up some extra. But that's about the only time you want to do that. Alright, so that's resource management. Now, next tip is going to be about the power plants themselves. Something I kind of see people do is that, especially since coal is very cheap in the beginning of the game, it can be very tempting to buy a lot of coal plants, and it's not necessarily a bad idea. The thing to keep in mind is that it is actually very economically problematic to have too many plants that use the same resource. So for example, the 4 and the 10 plant are actually very good, and in a 3-player game, people probably should not be letting you get both. However, be aware that running both of them simultaneously is sort of forcing you to overuse that particular resource, and in a way you're going to be forced to make things more expensive for you. So because of that reason, it's probably not a bad idea to diversify your power plants just a little bit, or at least if you do have 2 that are burning the same thing early, make sure your 3rd power plant can go somewhere else into a different market, and then strongly consider, even if it's not better than these, strongly consider using your better coal plant and that alternative fuel instead, because once you keep burning your necessary long-term power plant fuel, you're going to make it more expensive for yourself. And don't think of things like, well, this will make it more expensive for anyone else to get in, so they won't get in. That doesn't work. Like, you're literally making it more expensive for yourself. Alright, finally, and a little bit trickier of an idea. In Power Grid, a very big element of the game is the concept of sandbagging. It's the idea that because you're jockeying for turn order and how important that is, literally it can be the difference between paying 1, 2, or 3 for fuel versus 5, 6, or 7 if you have a large player count. You often don't want to build more cities than you need. And in fact, quite the opposite. You want to build fewer, because what this game is ultimately is a game of 2 competing resources. 1, your power plant capacity, meaning how many cities your power plants can power, and the number of cities that you actually build. It is problematic if those two things are ever out of balance. So if you have 17 cities but you can only power 12, that's not good. But then again, the vice versa, if you can power 17 cities and you only build 12, you are vulnerable to someone else building out the game and winning. For example, if you can only power 12, your opponent could build 17, power 13, end the game and win, just like that. So, a good rule of thumb that I like to use is simply this one. Eventually you're going to have 3 power plants, and typically I will only power my 2 best ones, or occasionally my best one and my 3rd best if the situation dictates. But for example, even in a case like this where I have the 29, the 25, and the 13 power plant, I would strongly consider in this situation only powering the 25 and the 29 and power 9, build 9, and power 9 cities. Now you may think, well, that's crazy. The 13 plant is a win plant. It's free. It doesn't need any input in order to generate some power. Why wouldn't you just build the 10th city and score? Well, the answer is by the time you build that 10th city, its earnings are going to be diminishing returns. You're only going to earn a certain amount of money. In this case, you're going to earn $7 more. And the problem is, well, what is that $7 going to cost you in terms of altering the turn order? Now, if you know for a fact it will not influence turn order, then of course build that 10th city, score that extra $7, great. But if it's going to move you above 1 or 2 people and thus make it so that you're going to build cities afterwards or you're going to buy power plants after, that 7's not going to look so great, because consider being the second person into a city, that's an additional 5 costs right there. And if you're forced to jump and double pay some of the connection costs, that could be even more. And as well, if you have a lot of fuel to buy and you're paying more than the other person, that 7's going to go away right away. So just be careful which power plant you do and don't use. And like I said, a good rule of thumb if you don't really have a plan is just plan not to use your worst power plant at any given point. And when you buy a better one, then anticipate, even though you have 3, you're still probably only going to be activating 2 until it's time to win the game. Last turn of the game, that's usually the only time you want to use all of your power plants. Alright, so those are a couple of tips for Power Grid. Good luck out there.